Hi all. Firstly, thank you all for coming. My name's Simon Watson, worked for NCC Group for 2.5 years. I come from a background of hardware and embedded system development. So it's my first time sort of speaking publicly externally, so please forgive me if there's any nerves or I stumble over anything. I have practiced it, so hopefully it will go smoothly. Currently I'm looking into, alongside my client engagements, I'm also looking into LoRaWAN technology, which is a kind of wide area access network being implemented in things like smart cities, smart offices. And I want to hopefully share something a little bit different with you today. So one of my colleagues said that any good presentation he's ever been to has an XKCD cartoon in it, so I thought I'd get that out of the way early, and hopefully that'll be a good omen for me. So the talks that we've seen today, and generally when we talk about IoT security. Oh, okay. Do you want to put it on or just? Okay. So we talk a lot when we talk about security about things we can do technically, ways we can protect against vulnerabilities. The talks this morning, the discussions around whether we can implement policies and regulations to improve things are all really valid. And typically, when we think about security and we look in the media, we see headlines like these from the Register. No one wants to be on the wrong side of a Register headline, I think it's fair to say. And then, not wishing to gang up on VTech, I think Mark, the previous speaker, already mentioned them once, but you move up towards the perhaps more slightly, the more, I'll call it the more mainstream media end of the spectrum, BBC, Independent here, talking about worrying vulnerabilities in children's toys, children's baby monitors. As a parent of two young darlings, it's something that I'm kind of acutely aware of. And then at the top end of the security concerns, I guess we have stuff like this, and I had to really draw out the text from the FDA disclosure here, which was that the protocol used in this pacemaker did not use encryption, authentication, or authorization. So, clearly there's work to do. I mean, to be fair, I must point out this is 2 years old, but kind of highlights some of the issues that we see out there, and it's problems we still see in products today in my job. But I'd like to change tack slightly. And does anyone in the room remember when Facebook looked like this? So this was, I had to go back and look it up on Google. This is Facebook around 2005. I was one of the sort of early adopters at uni, got a Facebook account. It's great, I can upload photographs. That's really cool, I can share them with friends. That's really cool, I can tag friends in it. My friends can tag me in maybe drunken photos from a Friday night out, which less cool. And then it's okay, I can untag myself. But 2005, this was perhaps quite an innocent age. You upload pictures, share what I've been doing. Oh, I'm in the library revising and it's really hard. This kind of stuff. But generally perhaps quite an innocent age. And then fast forward maybe 10 years or so, and we have Cambridge Analytica scandal involving Facebook, technologies that were perhaps, let's hope, invented with good intentions, being used for dubious purposes. And for anyone just not familiar with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, essentially, through means that are not entirely clear, there was some comment I read online that there was an external researcher told Facebook they wanted access to the data for academic purposes. They were able to gather vast amounts of information on Facebook users and use those to model personalities for millions of people in the United States and I guess in Europe. Essentially, the story ends with potential election manipulation, but I won't go into the details too much. And you're probably wondering, how does this relate to IoT? And hopefully it will become clear now. And it's one of the things I noticed in, I think, Leonie's talk this morning, was that a lot of the things she identified as sort of security issues with IoT are not always things that we associate with technical security. in some ways it's just abusing functionality that exists in a product for bad. But if a typical pen test won't identify that, because they'll identify, let's say, outdated software, bad design practices, default passwords, insecure protocols, which are all hugely valid things, and the work that the IoT Security Foundation and others are doing to try and improve the situation is hugely valuable, and I'm not trying to take anything away from that by any means, but I also want to put this idea across that we should consider abuse of genuine functionality as a sort of security or certainly a privacy concern. And so, I don't know if anyone recognises this picture. Anyone? Yep. So yeah, for those of you that aren't aware, this is a US military base in, I think it's either Afghanistan or Iraq. And the background to this is that Strava, which is a popular sort of fitness tracking application, which I've used when I was trying to train for the London Marathon, gathered loads and loads of data on people's exercise kind of routines, allows you to track your runs, see how you've improved against your runs. And a while back they published this heat map of popular routes that people use for their runs, and as an unintended side effect of that, they published these routes that were in Afghan and Iraq, and showed some routes around US military bases. And Strava's comment at the time was, we are reviewing features that were originally designed for athlete motivation and inspiration to ensure they cannot be compromised by people with bad intent. And so, they didn't set out to disclose military secrets or diagrams of an airbase or a military base, but it kind of happened by accident. Second example I'd like to give of this kind of unintended consequence is this is a Nest camera, and you sort of think you go to a big company and you can rely on good security, and I'm sure that is true of Nest. I've not looked into the product in a great amount of detail. And the story I have here is that a while back, a family in the US was sitting down watching, some sort of sports game on a Saturday afternoon, and they heard what was basically like a public warning announcement coming from what they thought was their television. And it was sort of saying that there had been missiles fired at Los Angeles, Chicago, and Ohio, that President Trump had been taken to a secure location, and clearly they were quite alarmed. And the lady described it as 5 minutes of sheer terror. After some calls to 911 and eventually to Nest, they realised that this was basically a prank, and it had been exploited by someone reusing a password to access their account. And clearly password reuse is something we can sort of preach about and encourage people to use password managers, practice good security hygiene. But the point in this instance was that the family didn't actually realise that their Nest camera had a speaker. They thought it was coming from this announcement was coming from their television, and then they discovered it's got a speaker in it and it's got a microphone in it, and they didn't realise that. And if you go on the Nest website, once you scroll down a little bit, it is clear that it has this functionality. But it's you buy a camera, you think, oh, it's a camera, and I can see what's going on in my house. Happy days. And again, it's sort of an unintended side effect of this technology. And why is this sort of thing happening? And probably heard the phrase, oh, that's weird. There should be a slide there that says, data is the new oil, but I think it's white text and it's lost the formatting. So a lot of companies now are collecting as much data as they can because data is hugely valuable. You can connect it because you can, it might be useful, you might want to be able to try and monetize it. These are all valid things. I heard a great line the other day, which was someone described data as the new uranium, a kind of dangerous thing that we're not really sure how to dispose of well, which I thought was quite an interesting take on things. Hopefully none of my other slides are in white text, or there might be an issue here. So what can we do about these kind of problems? And one of the guys at work pointed out this idea to me, or this concept of a premortem. It comes from it's not a new idea. It's from 1989, and it's this idea of, if you try and imagine the worst case scenario, imagine something's already happened, then your ability to predict, the reasons that those things might happen is significantly increased. And it's something that I think that we should probably think about more when we're looking at IoT in general. And we talk about security, and it's all good stuff. But also, do we actually think about, well, we've got this device, this product we're going to build and sell, or we've got this device we're going to install in our homes and offices? Do we think what the worst case outcome of this kind of technology is? And so I'll use a brief example, and that is a smart office. And we think about, well, what's the worst that can happen with a smart office system that we're implementing? And kind of step one, turn off the lights, cut the power, cause effectively a denial of service attack. Is probably something that's on a lot of companies' risk registers, and is a very valid thing. But then there's other sort of perhaps more subtle abuses that you don't necessarily think about. If you've got a smart office and you're expecting your power consumption to be a certain amount, or at least reduced quite dramatically by implementing this thing, if someone hacks into it and they can manipulate when your lights are turned on, what your aircon's doing, they could use it to abuse power consumption, run up electricity bill, something that you might not anticipate kind of coming, you might not be aware of. If you've got like desk occupancy tracking and you're using that to try and monitor, I guess, whether you turn the lights on in a particular area to see whether you need a certain amount of desks, a kind of an attacker or a black team would find it very interesting to see that data and be able to say, well, okay, this area of the office is not very often occupied, or there's no one there at the moment. We can go in there and use some desks there with a low risk of being found. More deviously, perhaps, a company might install this with good intentions, but perhaps they then start using it to track their employee movements. How much time are people really spending at their desks? That data will exist in the data set of, is there someone sat at this desk or not? And it only takes someone to start using that in a perhaps slightly underhand way to potentially cause issues. Gaming the system. One of my friends who works in the City of London told me that in his office building they've got smart lifts, and you can kind of call the lifts from like a little screen outside, and it's meant to have some sort of intelligence to make sure everyone's appropriately serviced as they request floors. But they worked out that if you press a certain kind of set of key combinations and keep doing it, you can make the lift think that the lift is full at your floor, and then take you straight all the way down, meaning that everyone else on the other sort of 30 floors in between has to then wait while the lift stops at all the other floors in between. The data might get sold. A lot of companies are buying these systems now, installing them, and a third party is collecting the data, and you think, great, I don't have the responsibility of running the infrastructure, running the systems for this. I just pay a company some money, they install it in my office, and I get all the information. But do you read all the small print and understand what information that company is extracting as their kind of part of their price? So an example of that might be, air conditioning supplier, if they had access to that data and they were able to see that after a certain amount of time their air conditioning systems require servicing or something, then could they subtly manipulate their prices to work out that, well, we know this system's likely to fail, so we'll maybe bump up the price of this company's maintenance. And so, what can we do about this? And it's perhaps not as simple as regulation, and I'm not going to claim to have the sort of the silver bullet here. But I'd like to leave you with a few things to think about, and hopefully you will have found this talk interesting. So, one, have you thought about doing a pre-mortem of your product or the system you're going to deploy? What is, even if it's a bit wacky and a bit implausible, what is the worst case scenario of this system going wrong? If you're a developer, how much data are you collecting? Do you need to collect, I've looked at some smart sensors, and they collect a phenomenal amount of data for, something that is, meant to do, let's say, motion sensing. Maybe it also tracks humidity and temperature. And all that data is fed back into some sort of cloud-based system. Does all that data need to be collected? Can you keep the data at the edge and do processing at the edge and only transmit back kind of deltas, changes. So you say, well, I want to set a temperature threshold, and the sensors will contact me when the temperature exceeds that threshold, but I'm not getting this constant reporting and this constant stream of data. Can you make stuff opt in and not opt out? The Google Nest camera is a good example of that. These people, this family installed a camera in their homes and didn't realize it had some functionality, but could you argue that they should have explicitly had to, when they, as part of their setup process, say, I want to turn on A, B, C, D features, and I kind of acknowledge that this is what it's going to be doing. It's something that I noticed mobile phones are sort of starting to move towards getting a lot better at now. The latest version of Android has I think it now tells you, do you want to let this app use your location all the time, or do you want it to only allow it to collect data when you're running the application? So, the trend is perhaps moving in the right direction, but, is it something that we could be doing more to develop in the IoT kind of space? And that slide should say, thank you, and have my email address at the bottom, which is simon.watson@nccgroup.com. These two books, if any of the kind of topics or the areas of interest in the talk have sort of piqued your interest at all, I would highly recommend both of them, particularly the Hello World book is very interesting about how algorithms and things are affecting the world today, and kind of it was what got me starting to think more about the data that's being collected and the sorts of uses and abuses that could be made of it. So yeah, I hope you found it interesting. If anyone has any feedback about the content or my presentation style, please see me afterwards and let me know, because I'd really appreciate any feedback. And yeah, thank you for your time.